Yesterday, we saw President Zelensky going out and telling the world about his appreciation for the support that America and its allies has given him so far. However, he does believe they need to take a bigger step towards actually getting involved in the conflict. Zelensky has urged President Joe Biden to declare a no-fly zone over significant parts of Ukraine, denying Russian aircraft the ability to operate. This is the self-hypnosis of those who are weak, insecure inside, despite the fact they possess weapons many times stronger than we have, he said Friday, decrying the inaction so far. The White House and NATO have dismissed Zelensky's demands, but that hasn't deterred advocates, including pundits, member of Congress, and former defense officials from endorsing such a move on top of that. A Reuters Ipsos poll released Friday found that 74% of Americans are in favor of NATO imposing Zelensky's requested no-fly zone over Ukraine. At first glance, that strong support makes sense. To many Americans, a no-fly zone probably sounds less dangerous than deploying American ground forces to Ukraine and better than doing nothing. Russian President Vladimir Putin, though, would certainly interpret a no-fly zone as an act of war and putting a bullseye on his back, and that makes it a little bit riskier to maneuver in such a way. Philip Breedlove, a retired U.S. Air Force general and former NATO Supreme Allied Commander for Europe, went in depth with foreign policy on Sunday to describe what a no-fly zone over Ukraine would require. Sorry, fumbled my words there. I'm actually a proponent of it, but let me now tell you why it will probably not happen. Because the reality of a no-fly zone is, it is an act of war. There are a lot of people who don't understand no-fly zones. You don't just say that's a no-fly zone. You have to enforce a no-fly zone, which means you have to be willing to use force against those who break the no-fly zone. The second thing, which nobody understands, is if you put a no-fly zone in the eastern part of Ukraine, for instance, and we're going to fly coalition or NATO aircraft into that no-fly zone, then we have to take out all the weapons that can fire into our no-fly zone and cause harm to an aircraft, or to our aircraft. So that means bombing enemy radars and missile systems on the other side of the border. And you know what that means, right? That is tantamount to war. So if we're going to declare a no-fly zone, we have to take down the enemy's capability to fire into and affect our no-fly zone. And few understand that. And I can see why a lot of people are outraged over the fact that a no-fly zone or no bigger things are coming out of the other countries to help Ukraine. But at the moment, if we were to escalate the scale of this war, the amount of deaths and the amount of carnage that would come out of that would be almost unheard of, especially since it would be against a global superpower that has nuclear weapons at the ready. So earlier we did see a woman questioning Boris Johnson on this, and I do want to play that video for you because he also does mention the fact that he wouldn't be able to do it as a military, or he wouldn't be able to do a no-fly zone because how the military would have to shoot down planes that cross into the no-fly zone and potentially even have to attack soldiers and weaponry and so on. So let's take a look at that video right now, and we'll just kind of see his response because it does seem very level-headed, and he does seem like he's actually genuinely listening to her as well.
Ukrainian women and Ukrainian children are in deep fear because of bombs and missiles which are going from the sky. And Ukrainian people are desperately asking for the West to protect our sky. We are asking for the no-fly zone. We are saying in response that it will trigger World War III. But what is the alternative, Mr. Prime Minister? To observe how our children are, instead of planes, are protecting NATO from the missiles and bombs? What's the alternative for the no-fly zone? We have planes here, we have air defense system in Poland, in Romania. NATO has this air defense. At least this air defense could shield the western Ukraine so that these children with women could come to the border. It's impossible now to cross the border. There are 30 kilometers of lines. Imagine crossing the border with a baby or with 2 children. I'm so glad that Samantha Power is coming here to the border from the Polish side. Let her come to the border from Ukrainian side and see that. Britain guaranteed our security under Budapest Memorandum. So you're coming to Poland. You're not coming to Kiev, Prime Minister. You're not coming to Lviv. Because you are afraid. Because NATO is not willing to defend. Because NATO is afraid of the World War III. But it is already started. And these are Ukrainian children who are there taking the hit. You're talking about more sanctions, Prime Minister. But Roman Abramovich is not sanctioned. He's in London. His children are not in the bombardments. His children are there in London. Putin's children are in Netherlands, in Germany, in mansions. Where are all these mansions seized? I don't see that. I see that my family members, that my team members are saying that we are crying. We don't have where to run.
Well,
This is what is happening, Prime Minister.
well, thank you very much for your questions, and thank you for getting here today. And I'm glad that you have been able to get here. And look, I just want to say that I'm acutely conscious that there is not enough that we can do as the UK government to help in the way that you want. And I've got to be honest about that. And when you talk about the no-fly zone, as I said to Volodymyr Zelensky, I think a couple of times, unfortunately, the implication of that is that the UK and would be engaged in shooting down Russian planes, would be engaged in direct combat with Russia. That's not something that we can do or that we've envisaged. And I think the consequences of that would be truly very, very difficult to control. What we can do is all the things that we are doing already, and providing as much help and support to the Ukrainians as we can. And as I said to you earlier on, the UK was the first European country to offer military assistance. Also doing everything we can to tighten the economic noose around the Putin regime, and we were amongst the very first to put that package together. And I have to tell you, I think that it will work. I think that Vladimir Putin's venture is doomed to fail, and I think that it will be extremely difficult for him to continue on the path that he is on. But in the meantime, as you rightly say, there is going to be a period of suffering for the people of Ukraine, for which Putin and Putin alone is responsible. He's taken a decision that I think many people around the world find absolutely inexplicable as well as inexcusable. And it will take time, I'm afraid, for us to come through this period. All we can do in the meantime is help people like your crew and your family to get out, to get to safety, help them with all the humanitarian support that we can provide, help them to come to the UK, and we certainly will. But I cannot pretend to you that this is going to be something that the UK can fix by military means, and I think it would be wrong of me to do so. But what I will say is that I think that this whole misadventure by Vladimir Putin has raised questions now about the security of Europe and what we do.
So here's another thing a lot of people seem to forget about no-fly zones. No-fly zones are typically used when the military force conducting the no-fly zone has typically greater power than the one that would be going against it. And with Russia's military the way it is, the only other entity that the only two entities I could see that could go toe-to-toe with their overall firepower would be America and even potentially India. They have the right amount of troops and most likely have the right amount of vehicles. But the issue is with the amount of power and military force that Putin has, even if they were to try to implement it, there would be lots of casualties on both sides. Not only would it be an act of war that would probably get China to go in and start helping Russia, it would also be an act of war that would get every country to start, well, essentially racking up casualties. And at this point, I think it is the right move to delay it for now, see where things are going, mainly because this hasn't reached the point of World War yet. So I feel like once it gets to that point, then no-fly zones and military force will be used. But instead of making that first step themselves on the West side, they're waiting for Putin to do it himself so that they won't get blamed essentially for World War III. But this no-fly zone is a lot trickier than most people give it credit for. And that's kind of why I wanted to make this video. Because I already knew that if there was a no-fly zone, that would require many forms of, air vehicles, what's wrong with me? With many forms of planes and helicopters to help patrol the skies, and Ukraine doesn't really have those at this moment, so they can't do a no-fly zone themselves, so they would be relying on NATO or the UK or America or some other entity that would be able to put the planes in the air for it to work. And if that were to happen, of course, Putin would see that again as a target on his back, and an act of war has now exceeded, or it has now been, what's the word I'm looking for? An act of war has now been put out there. I couldn't think of the word I was thinking of. But anyways, guys, I wanted to make this video just to try to clarify the reason why people are not jumping the gun and going for a no-fly zone. It's not that they agree to not fly there. It's that military force is required and people will die. That's the problem. Anyways, guys, I'll see you all next time. Love you all. Bye-bye.